I'm Dr. Sheila Smith McCoy. I am a black person of African descent.
Catch me, don't let me fall. I need a vision.
I've heard African students and African American students say all manner of things that make absolutely no sense about each other. I've in particular heard African Americans be very unintelligent around issues of, do you all live in trees, or do you wear clothes, or do you guys have TV in Africa? African Americans, like most Americans, do not understand the great diversity that Africa is, and they also have been sort of brainwashed by the Western world into believing a certain stereotype about Africa and Africans.
You gon' need me later. He needs a fat purse, of course. She wants for better.
By the same token, the same colonial powers that took over much of Africa also colonized the mindset of many Africans who believe what they see on television about African Americans. So I had a student who I took to Ghana in 2010 who was called the N-word for the first time while she was in Ghana by another Ghanaian student who thought that she was being respectful and polite in terms of hip-hop culture by referring to this young woman as the N-word. I've also been in South Africa and had a woman who identified as colored feel sorry for me for being African American.
You miss your papa, that's why you cry.
I think a large part of the divides that we express are part of a larger history of colonization and enslavement that we as collective people need to address.
I need to fly high above the sky.
We have to work around generational patterns. We can often, for instance, find people, Africans in the U.S., who have parents who tell them don't be like those African Americans, because they believe that all African Americans are underclass people who they've seen on the news or in film and video, without taking as a whole that just as it is true in Africa, there are people who are underclass and middle class and upper class, and people who are criminal and people who aren't. And so one of the things that we have to do is to break these generational conversations. By the same token, people who would identify as African American need to understand that just because their parents did not understand the fullness and richness that is Africa, doesn't mean that they should not as educated people. And so I would encourage students at NC State to have cross-cultural conversations about what it means to be black. I would encourage students to engage in films to talk about these issues. And so the only way you can walk across these divides is, first of all, to admit that there's a problem, and second of all, be very conscientious about connecting across those boundaries, recognizing that many of them were created artificially and out of positions of lack of knowledge and ignorance that we just need to work around.
Won't you catch me, don't let me fall.
I think all of us should probably take a page out of the book of Malcolm X, who in the midst of the point that he was assassinated was in the process of bringing the United States before the United Nations to have sanctions placed against the U.S. for the treatment of African Americans. And in order to do that, he got votes from 16 African countries that were willing to step up and talk about the ways in which African Americans were dehumanized in this country was a problem. I doubt that anybody could get 16 African countries to stand up on that platform right now. And I think I would throw out the gauntlet for students who are African Africans and people who are African Americans to try to continue that work of unity and Pan-Africanism that was so important to not only the original patriarchs of newly independent African nations, but to those people who were working Pan-Africanists across those lines, like Malcolm X.
Why do you hate me? Why don't you care?